it.
Got him.
No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
With the second pick in the 2011 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Von Miller, linebacker, Texas A&M.
He's the greatest ever, huh?
And then I just wanted
When you got all the advantages, it's easy.
Welcome to the Aggie War Pod, a product of Dave Campbell's Republic of Football Podcast Network. I am your co-host, Mike Craven, senior writer at DCTF. The other voice you'll hear on this podcast is a barbecue-eating machine who won't shy away from a road trip or an off-key rendition of Creed. The former fighting Texas Aggie defensive lineman arrived in College Station as a three-star prospect back in 2013. He now resides in Houston, but his heart never left. Ladies, gentlemen, reveille, I present the one, the only, Jay Arnold.
And we are in the dog days of the off season now that spring ball's over. We don't have any real football content other than just speculating and drawing way too many conclusions from a glorified scrimmage.
Yeah, speak for yourself, Jay Arnold. I am in the middle of magazine season. I went to 11 different colleges in 15 days, starting on April 2nd, and that is the fun part. Believe it or not, the driving around and interviewing the coaches and watching practice, that is the easy part. The hard part is when you leave there and you go, oh, I have to transcribe all this and then make it into a magazine article. Oh, yeah, while the portal's going on. So they'll tell you about some of their players that like it no longer matters, or one position group is solid and then, two people leave. And so, I left, I did TCU 3 days later. Their best defensive tackle is, best defensive player overall is in the portal. Maybe go into your original favorite school, OU. We'll see what happens there with Dominic Williams. But just a wild time to try to put together a magazine. Everybody will ask me like, what do you do when football's not around? Like football's always around. Something will happen. I've been a little surprised while we get off topic here. Have you been a little surprised that there hasn't been any like big time name brand players jumping into the portal? Do you think that they've realized showing up somewhere in the summer is probably not advantageous if it's not a bad situation here? If I'm not, if you're a third string on the depth chart, sure. If you're going to go make, $1 million more than you would have beforehand, sure. But I think otherwise it seems like guys are starting to realize the January is when to move and maybe the summer is where to stay put.
Yeah, I think that most of the top guys are just, sticking with whatever decisions they made in the winter. And I do think that's going to be the big transfer portal movement place going forward. Although there are some, right? Caden Proctor comes to mind that may transfer in the winter window and then decide, maybe I don't like Iowa that much and transfer right back after spring ball. But it is going to be something to monitor going forward and definitely going to be interesting. But like you said, I do think that this is going to be more of a situation where you get your big transfer guys in the winter window, and then you kind of find bit pieces here and there and stitch together the last pieces of your roster after spring ball.
I wonder if NIL collectives are getting smarter too, where, you write into the contract, you get 90% of this come August 1st. Like we'll give you a 10% kind of signing bonus when you get here in January or when you sign as a recruiter, however you got to that school. The rest of it's August 1st or September 1st or something during the football season. I'd love to get my hands on a few more of those NIL contracts. That's kind of my big whale or my white whale right now is how all this NIL stuff goes down behind the scenes, because there's just so much misinformation out there. I think the players, and you talk to these people and they seem confused about it sometimes, or they seem like they're lying to you. I just think that they don't know. I just think there's so much unknown behind the scenes, even by the people who are supposed to know. That's just where we're at in that process. Before we get going in the show, we are proud to be partners with Home Field Apparel. Please use promo code WHOOP, WHOOP, for 15% off your first purchase. Please rate us a 5-star on your preferred podcast and even your unpreferred podcast listening service, right? Like I'm a Spotify person. I went and 5-starred us on Apple, and so please do it on all of those things. If you'd like to advertise with us, please hop in one of our DMs. And the podcast only grows if you help us grow it. We usually do this in the first down, second down, third down, fourth down. I'm just going to scrap that this time because it feels like we're talking about a pretty singular thing. That is the spring game. For those who don't know, on April 20th, the Maroon team, Team Zune, by the way, Team Zun, Trey Zune, he was able to beat Team White, Torian York's team, 24-10. I thought it was interesting. Mike Elko kind of gave the two captains kind of like a schoolyard type draft. And I think they mentioned this maybe in the broadcast, but I was there when he was talking to the 12th man production people. So Trey Zune, the left tackle, Torian York, middle linebacker, are the two captains, right? Mike Elko correctly predicted who their first picks were going to be. And I think you'll appreciate this, Jay, as a former player. You'll see the strategy here. Who do you think Trey Zune would have picked first?
Well, I'm cheating because I listened to the broadcast and I know what happened.
Yeah.
But the first pick was Nick Scorton.
Yeah. So he didn't have to block.
I heard, the reason was I heard that he didn't want to have to block him.
Yeah.
Which, given Nick Scorton's performance in the game, made a lot of sense.
3D chess. That's a smart left tackle right there. You can tell his parents are in education. That was a smart pick there by the left tackle. And then Torian York picked DJ Hicks, so he had a big dude in front of him to take up blocks. I just absolutely love it. The other thing that happened, I think, organically, is because Trey's an offensive player and Torian's a defensive player. Essentially, it became first offense, first defense in a lot of ways. Like a lot of Trey's first picks were offense, obviously, because you're picking your boys. A lot of Torian's first pick, and so it did kind of become a ones first ones, in a limited situation there at times. What were your overall thoughts on the game? Because obviously the score doesn't really matter, right? Like nobody cares who wins or who loses that game. But just your initial kind of thoughts on the spring game and I guess you weren't there, not the atmosphere, but just the overall kind of vibe from it for what it looked like on TV.
Yeah, I tried to stay away from it because of the weather. I decided that making the trip up to College Station maybe wasn't ideal. But as far as the game itself, obviously you would have liked to have more people there, but unfortunately the weather is what it is. And also, I think A&M's kind of struggled with spring attendance a little bit in the past. You also have a baseball team that's just incredible right now and doing great things.
And I think they were on the road.
Yeah, they were at Alabama.
Yeah.
I think softball was at home, and track and field was also having their last home meet of the year.
Yep.
So multiple events going on in College Station. Not to make excuses for the spring game, because again, it's glorified scrimmage. Like
150,000 people will be there when they play Notre Dame. Like that place is going to be rocking. I think, yeah, you're right. I mean, it started pouring in the second half. They had moved it up an hour because they knew the weather was going to be bad. I think it's kind of lame to be a big. I grew up going to spring games. Like I'm a football. Like I'm not disparaging you from going. I am disparaging you from like attendance counting and thinking that's a big deal. OU does the spring game huge. There's a couple places that just like pack it in for the spring game. I thought overall though it was a solid game. Like I enjoyed the fact that it was 4 quarters, 2 teams playing some football. Like right, it wasn't. You could tell they weren't getting exotic and things like that, but it was still football in a way that not all of these spring games are football anymore.
Yeah. And it felt like a very cohesive game because of that, right? Like it didn't feel like we were constantly like throwing in weird things and wrinkles and doing a lot of gimmick stuff, right? Like I'm a professional wrestling fan. I enjoy a gimmick match every once in a while, but I also just enjoy classic 30-minute matches, 2 guys going at it, getting technical. And it felt like this game was more of a traditional football game, and I enjoyed that. Maybe we've had the gimmicks for too long in the spring games, and it's time to get back to football. But it also just felt like, even though there was some mix-ups there with the offensive line, it just felt like the team kind of gelled together a little bit more, and we'll dive into that. But it felt like real football.
Yeah, not a lot of pre-snap penalties. It looked relatively clean. I kind of like Mike Elko's approach of just like this no nonsense. I've enjoyed his press conferences. Every time I've gone to a press conference, I've it's been funny. It's had some levity as part of it. They asked him about the bonfire on Wednesday when I was up there doing magazine stuff, and he was like, "Nope." There's plenty of swords for me to fall on. I'm not going to create my own. He's done a pretty good job of being solid with the media, with the fans. And I think when you see the spring game being as workmanlike as it is, it just fits his personality, right? He's just a football dude. And I thought it was cool. Like he talked about how it would be unfair of them to just have another practice when they've already had 14. Like you've banged heads against your friends all, like at least go have a game, have something to compete against, have some fun, keep score. I like that the score was normal, and not like when you're like, what the hell is 13 to 12? How did it get to 13 and 12? I liked it. So I'm maybe this is my age. Maybe I'm just too old school to be into the dunk contests and stuff like that. But if you have the depth to do it, like, because not all schools can do a spring game the way Texas and Texas A&M can, especially in the portal age. But if you have the depth to do it, if you have the guys on the roster to do it, I prefer it that way. Let's just do offense, defense. What were your offensive thoughts? What were some things that stood out to you for the offense?
Yeah, the offensive line still has a ways to go, I think.
Yeah.
And again, part of that may have been because it was mixed and matched a little bit. I think there were improvements made. I think the blocking at the second level was better than it has been in years past. But there was still just a few too many times where guys were getting to the quarterback a little bit too quickly. And again, part of that is because like you have a guy like Nick Scorton who is very obviously going to be a factor rushing the passer for Texas A&M this year. But I mean that's my biggest takeaway there. The other takeaway I have is man, if Noah Thomas can stay healthy, he is going to be a problem. It's a big if, but I mean, he was a guy that I was very high on last year, just kind of never really materialized. I think he had some big moments, but again, the health that kind of plagued him throughout the season just kind of limited his ceiling a little bit. But I think we saw glimpses of it, and him and Ja'Day Walker together are a very scary two wide receivers, and then you throw in guys like Moose or Cyrus in the slot, and it's a scary offense in my opinion.
Sometimes when I watch Moose Muhammad, I know why Jimbo Fisher was frustrated by him at times. Like, and you saw the whole thing during the spring game, right? Like there were some times where if he would have blocked a little bit harder, the run would have gone a little bit further. There were some times where the ball wasn't thrown perfectly, and you'd like your guy to go try to get that. And so I mean, it's a spring game, so maybe don't expose your ribs. But then he's also like usually open. And always makes the tough catches and stuff. So it's just like a full experience with Moose Muhammad. But that wide receiver group has pretty big boom bust potential. And I don't think it's really anything about them as much as the injuries, right? Just like until they prove, all three of those guys, until they prove that they can play a relatively full season, you're going to need depth there. Yeah, Thomas was really good. Really good player. I have him right now behind the curtain here. Have him as like a second team all Texas player because I think he's that good, but it scares me too. Because like I think he has the potential, because he's one of those guys that at the end of the season, if I don't put him on there, I'm gonna look at it and go like come on, dude, like you knew that was happening. I'm gonna have Jay Arnold in my ear, like what are you doing? Like what? How did you miss that one? But then you could put him on there. He plays 2 games and has like 8 catches and all that kind of stuff. What going on the like Colin Klein's offenses rarely have the guy. Right, like it's rarely, and maybe this is the talent at Kansas State, but they haven't so far had the 70 catch, 1,000-yard guy in the Colin Klein offense. It's very much like spread the ball around, quarterback friendly, kind of easy pass type things a lot of times. Do you think that suits this? Like, do you think Noah Thomas is a potential first option wide receiver? Like, do they have an Evan Stewart in this group, or is it better to kind of do it by committee because there isn't that one star?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Noah Thomas has the potential to be that one star. I genuinely believe that his ceiling is extremely high. But with that being said, again, like you're counting on health when he hasn't shown it yet. And I do think to an extent that the more workmanlike approach to throwing the ball will be beneficial, especially if those guys go down, right? And then you have to kind of rely on your depth at wide receiver. Because I don't see another guy besides Noah. Like I'm a big fan of Ja'Day Walker, but I don't see him as like that star level.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of Moose Muhammad, but again, there's some inconsistencies there. Cyrus Allen is obviously a very talented receiver, but we don't really know how he's going to handle the step up from Louisiana Tech to Texas A&M. So I do think that ultimately that more workmanlike approach to the wide receiver position, where it's quick routes and easy reads for the quarterback, is going to be more beneficial, especially in the long term if somebody gets hurt.
Quarterback position, Marcel Reed looked incredible, especially in the first half, 8 of 10. You know, he had his first pass was incomplete, so he went 9 of 10 to close the first half. Had a touchdown at the end of that half, but because of the schoolyard draft pick situation, he had what looked like all the best wide receivers, or at least like what I consider to be A&M's top 3 or 4 wide receivers. Connor Wegman was not on that team. He was throwing to not the top 3 or 4 wide receivers, and that played a part of it as well. I don't think Connor Wegman's 100%, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn saying that. I mean, he had a pretty big foot ankle injury last year when he was forced to miss the rest of the season, and he clearly isn't 100% there. Props to him for like gutting it out and playing some in the spring, getting in the spring game, taking some snaps. Do you think that there is a quarterback competition behind the scenes, or do you think this is Connor Wegman, if he's healthy, he's the guy? Or do you think of Marcel Reed with some of these performances and just, I guess on paper, he feels like he fits what I think of as Colin Klein's offense so well. What do you think the quarterback situation is like if we choose sermed everybody? Not what they're saying out loud. I know what they're saying out loud. What do you think is the truth behind the scenes?
I mean, I still think it's Connor Wegman's offense if he's 100% healthy. With that being said, you know, honestly, and I think Kansas State did this a little bit last year, I wouldn't be surprised if we got multiple quarterbacks in a game.
That was going to be my next thing. Like, is Marcel kind of building this case of, well, you can't just put him straight on the bench, right? I mean, I guess if Wegman comes out and he's like Trevor Lawrence or something, just lighten it up. I mean, you got to do what you got to do, right? But it feels like Reed, with his play and his style, seemed like a guy you got to figure out some touches for.
Yeah, the ability to make plays with his legs. And again, I think we've talked about this ad nauseum where Connor Wegman was a fantastic runner in high school, but he's had a few injuries since then.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think he gets underrated as a runner in high school.
I don't disagree with you at all. I just
we forget he is a dual threat guy at one point. But yes, I agree. He probably isn't running the same 40 as he did when he was a junior in high school.
Exactly. And just another lower body injury is not going to help that.
Yeah.
So I do wonder if, you know, there's going to be some scenarios where you get somebody out there who has the ability to do both. And honestly, for me with Marcel Reed, I thought some of those runs, obviously it's an early whistle because you don't want your quarterback getting hurt. I think there's some plays there that he would have made that were blown dead early.
Oh yeah.
And I thought I thought he looked fantastic. Not just throwing, but also like there were times when I'm like, man, I want that guy on the field. Mm-hmm. And again, this isn't to take away anything from Connor Wegman, who I still think is the guy. But I do think that you find some ways to get him touches for multiple reasons. One, because I don't want to play against him, right? Like you don't want to play against him somewhere else. And it feels like Marcel Reed has a ton of talent and will fit very well in this Colin Klein offense.
Yeah, it absolutely does. That's a great point about you don't want to play against him. You know, kind of like it kind of almost feels like a little bit like Malik Murphy coming out of Texas in spring game last year, right? Where he has and you're trying to like push the brakes because you don't want the stock to rise too much, right? But I guess what I see down the road, or like a situation, one of the possibilities, right? One of the timelines down the road is that this A&M offensive line isn't great. That you can't fix an offensive line in one off season. It's average, maybe even below average at some spots, but it's not a great offensive line. And at that point, wouldn't it behoove you to have a quarterback who can move around a little bit more? And that's where that's the bad scenario I see this A&M offense getting into, right? It's week 4, it's week 5, it's week 6, and they're like, we just can't block these guys up, and we need the quarterback to be one of the 11, not just the guy slinging it around, getting it together. Like, we're going to need him to be a playmaker back there. If Connor's injuries, like if he's just not there yet physically, or just isn't there at all physically, like a Marcel Reed seems like he's got the style to mask a bad offensive line.
Yeah, he definitely does. And it's also the side of things where if the offensive line is bad, the likelihood of Connor Wegman getting injured is higher. So it's a kind of the both of those pieces where I do think Marcel Reed can mask those issues better. But also if the offensive line struggles as much as they did last year, again, we talked about it, 4 straight years of the starting quarterback going down, like that's not just coincidence. It's obviously a functional problem with the offensive line. And obviously there's new offensive line coach in here and you think changes are going to be made. But again, there's a much higher probability that they aren't made over 1 year than there is that everything is fixed and Connor Wegman stays healthy.
I do think this group has a chance to be a solid run blocking unit. We've kind of talked about that a little bit before, that they can go forward, and it seems like a lot of those guys on this roster can still go forward. And to that point, I think the running back room and the running attack of this offense can really be a strength of this team.
Yeah, and I think we saw that from Le'Veon Moss and Reuben Owens both. I think they both had some big runs. Obviously, like I feel like we've just been kind of waiting for Reuben Owens to break off a run like that, like he did in the spring game. So that was great to see. And you have to wonder if, a little bit better run blocking up front can really showcase some things. And you would theoretically expect this to be a better run blocking offense as well, too.
Yeah, his explosiveness, you can't replicate that, right? Like, he's just one of the guys. There's not many guys on the offense right now that can take it to the house, right? That just, like, if given a seam, that's going to take a 4-yard play to an 80-yard play. Reuben Owens is one of those guys. I think he's going to be good in the kickoff return as well. This coaching staff seems like more of a round hole, round peg type group, right? Like, they're not going to make guys try to be anything that they're not. And I think that's going to help Reuben Owens. I think a lot of times the previous staff was too quick to try to turn him into an every down back and ask him to do some stuff that, like, he was a true freshman from El Campo. Like, he's like, he doesn't need to be in there in pass pro. Like, what's going on here? I think this staff's going to do a better job of playing to his strengths. That's going to be a good thing for him as well. Before we move on to the defense, I guess just anything else offensively that you want to talk about? I feel like we may have been accidentally hard on Connor Wegman there. At least maybe I was. I agree with you. I think Connor Wegman is the quarterback here, right? Like, I mean, you could Google Mike Craven, Connor Wegman, right? Like, I'm as big of a Connor Wegman guy dating back to the rankings as you can find. The injury stuff scares you. And in this state, I mean, I'm pretty Texas centric, so I don't know what the national numbers are. But in this state last year, only 2 of the 13 FBS teams started the same quarterback every single game. The year before that, it was I think 10 of the 12, because Sam Houston wasn't an FBS team at that point. So you're gonna need multiple quarterbacks. Like, there's just not very often where you're gonna play 12, 13, 14 games and have the same quarterback. I do think Wegman has the best talent, the best arm. That first throw of the spring game was a perfect example. Like, that thing was whipped. Like, that was a hell of a throw. I just think if you're the Aggies, you're the Aggie fans, you have to come to grips with, we're probably going to be starting a couple quarterbacks throughout this year. And I do think Marcel Reed brings a skill set that can be advantageous to what is around him in this offense.
Yeah. And I don't want to completely discount Jalen Henderson either. Because he's also still very talented. But yeah, look, if you had to pick one gap in Marcel Reed's repertoire, I would say that the Connor Wegman long ball is just so much prettier. And it's nice to have that possibility and threat going deep. But as far as other pieces of the offense that we didn't talk about, Donovan Green, whenever he gets back, right, that's going to be a big piece at the tight end position. Honestly, I don't think Theo Melon-Ostrom looked bad. I think there were some times where he needed to stay on his blocks a little bit longer at the tight end position, but he, as a relative neophyte to the game, comparatively, or at least at this level, I think that we've seen steady improvement from him every year. And again, part of this is me wanting to have like a foreign player to root for. Like, I don't know, something about that. Like, it's just growing the game, right? So having a Swedish guy starting at tight end or being a significant player at tight end would be nice.
Do you have this is a spring game, so you probably didn't do this much breaking down, but do you have a Ruben Fathery plus or Demetrius Crownover kind of right tackle take? Has it changed at all from what you've seen, or just not enough to see on Saturday to make a call there?
I think it's not enough to see to make a call. And part of that too is Ruben Fathery had to deal with, I felt like a little bit better defensive line too.
Yeah.
But I'm not confident either way. I think Demetrius Crownover was my pick going into this. I still feel that way. But I do think that Ruben Fathery looked better than he has in a long time, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I think
it's just actually seeing him out there.
I think a new coaching staff is a big deal for a lot of guys. I think Ruben is one of the ones that it's the most Like from what I have gathered from everybody, every interview I've done with a player on the Texas A&M team so far, discipline has been the thing that they've talked about. And I don't know if this is Ruben's issue or not. I'm not talking about him individually. I think one of the reasons that we haven't seen a lot of those 5-star, high 4-star guys develop during their time at A&M is they weren't held to a standard that allowed them to develop, right? Like they were allowed to kind of do as much as they wanted to do or willing to do so they didn't get into the portal and leave. And you just see a bunch of guys be good as freshmen and just not take the next step, like just never take the next step. I think when you're being held accountable, like Trey and Torian talked, like they're having to do breakfast and dinner, like team meals. You know, like that never happened, Jimbo. You just went and did your own thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
And just little things like that, I feel like are building some accountability. Feels like the weight room's a little bit more proactive and like, you know, accountable than it used to be. Things like that. I mean, that stuff behind the scenes, like, you know, this, you don't win during the fall. Like you win in the offseason. It's all the stuff that people don't see. I think the new staff is doing better at the small details and holding guys accountable. And you may lose some dudes to the portal because of that. But I think you're going to see bigger jumps from some of these guys who they go away from a year and then you're like, well, why hasn't he gotten any better? I don't think that question is going to be asked as much anymore.
Yeah, it's also like it feels like it's cliche to say it, but like with the breakfast and dinner thing, like it's also a little bit of a team building thing, right? Like it does feel like there's a lot of individuality that maybe you know, didn't always translate to doing well on the field. And I do feel like part of that discipline is just getting the guys together, making it more of a team thing. You know what I mean?
Yep. Oh, no doubt. And it's like punctuality, right? Like be on time. You know, like if someone says 8:30, like probably get there at 8:20. You know, like just things like that. I think they bleed into the team even when they don't, right? Like people with kids will tell you that, you know, they just like, you set some standards and kids do whatever it is that you held them to. Right. And like a lot of these guys they're getting paid and they're badasses and they're 6'4", 280 pounds, but they still need to be held accountable. You know, like they still have to have a coach. Right. And I think that was kind of lost at times in the previous staff. And it does feel like from what they're saying, I mean, we'll see. Right. But from what everybody is saying, it seems like the accountability factor in that locker room has been raised by a lot. And I think that's a great start for the staff because talent hasn't been the issue at A&M. And so it's figuring out how to harness that talent. Defensively, you know, we joked we were joking on Twitter about how you can't, you know, draw too many conclusions from the spring game. And I do adhere to that. However, Nick Skirton, my Lord. Like that dude is a really good football player. Mike Elko said after the practice, Shamar Stewart, Nick Skirton on the edges. A&M is going to have two of their best bookend defensive ends that have been at A&M in a long, long time. Let's start there. How impressed were you with just the edge players that A&M has right now?
Oh man, it feels like a new era, and I think that you know, having those edge rushers and it's like. Nick Scorton is not like just a pure speed guy, but he definitely has more twitch than I think we've seen on the edge in a while for A&M. It just feels like they're going to be so much better rushing the passer without needing to bring the extra blitzers. I mean, there's obviously going to be some of that exotic stuff involved, but man, and then I mean, I thought Shamar Stewart looked fantastic too.
Yeah, he did.
Like I just think that it was just like so impressive. What the edge rushers were able to do. And again, you don't want to read too much into it because I know we've had the struggles with the offensive line. So like in the back of my head, I'm thinking, you know, well, yes, but this is an offensive line that has struggled with pass pro for the past few years.
And he wasn't going against the starting left tackle because the starting left tackle, as we mentioned earlier, picked him first. So he didn't have to go up against him.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, you can't have like, it's also, you look at it and he was the Big Ten sack leader for a reason.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's not an accident. And he did it for a program where he was getting all the attention. It's not like he was at Ohio State and you couldn't double him because they have 13 other guys running around. Like he was at Purdue, right? So, I mean, he was getting the attention, still putting up those numbers. Like Cassius Howe, looked good as well. I mean, that's a big step up from Bowling Green to SEC play, but he's going to be a player for them. I don't think edge rush is going to be an issue, and that helps everything else in the defense, right? The secondary plays better if the pass rush is going on, and linebackers play better. So I think that's going to trickle down on the interior of the defensive line. This may be a silly media question I'm about to ask. Should we read into, because I don't know who the etched in starters are at defensive tackle. I guess Shamar Turner going to be a full-time defensive tackle this year. Albert Regis, those kind of guys. Is DJ Hicks like obviously a starter at defensive line if he was the first pick of the schoolyard draft? Like, is that the players telling you kind of who the dude is in the interior of that line?
I think it's pretty safe to assume that DJ Hicks is going to be the guy for the interior of the defensive line. And to be honest with you, I think we saw pieces of that in the Texas Bowl against Oklahoma State. And I think, just having another offseason, getting in the weight room and then getting into, uh, the spring practices, having more time to develop. I think it's pretty obvious that Hicks is going to be a stud on the defensive line, and there's a reason that he was the number 1 pick.
Yeah. Great dude. Crazy story. Got shot his senior year in high school. I wrote a story in the Rising magazine. We do a recruiting magazine in December, and he was our cover boy, and I wrote that story. Pretty wild story. Moved around a few times. His dad's a coach, a high school coach at Katy Pato right now. So good to see him flourish. Like we talked about, he seemed like he's one of those 5-star guys that kind of like goes into the oven for a year and you like want to see what comes out on the other side. I think he's going to be a really, really good football player. Who plays next to him and what they do defensive tackle wise, I think is interesting. Do you go small and have a Shamar Turner next to him? Do you go big with Brownlow Dindy or Regis? Kind of, I guess you can mix and match. It's not like you're married to your starters there, but I do think the edges are going to be so good that the interior becomes the question, just because there's fewer answers there right now on paper.
Yeah, I think this defensive line will actually be better than they were last year. And maybe that's reading into it too much, but just because it feels like there's immediate improvement on the edges. I do think that, like me personally, I think a Shamar Turner at 3 technique is going to be that foursome along the defensive line. But things may change. And I still think of Gabriel Brownlow-Dendy, if he can be healthy. I thought he looked good in the Texas Bowl. So I think, again, you're going to see rotations. It's probably going to differ game plan to game plan depending on the opponent. Having options is always a good thing. And then you have Rodas Johnson, the Wisconsin transfer, who I also thought was pretty good in the spring game. So there's definitely some options on the defensive line. I think if you're A&M, you have to be excited about it. And again, it feels like a more disciplined, bought-in unit this year up front.
Yeah. Torian York, really good at linebacker. Obviously, I just think it's amazing that the kid's 18 years old still and got voted a captain unanimously. It sounds like, pretty. Elko kind of talked about usually it's 4 or 5 guys that kind of get all the picks, and you end up with 4 or 5 captains. It sounded like Trey and Torian were so overwhelmingly picked that those are the 2 captains. Just 18 years old, like that's just maturity beyond his years. I guess the question becomes who plays next to him. With Edrin Cooper no longer there anymore, who becomes that second linebacker? I thought Scooby Williams was really good from what I saw in the spring game. I won't pretend to be somebody who can like break it down in real time, but he flashed a bunch to where I didn't feel like I was wondering what was going on at linebacker, right? Like it felt like it was a solid performance by those guys.
Yeah, and he looked like a great athlete. He showed that he can run, do all the things that a modern linebacker has to do. I thought Scooby Williams looked great. I think things are going to get a little bit interesting with the news from the portal today, and Solomon DeShields from Pittsburgh deciding to transfer in, because I think he's an impact player coming in. But again, you can rotate personnel in on defense, and it feels like having another linebacker at a guy like Solomon DeShields is going to be an asset. I would have said after the spring game that Scooby Williams had secured a starting spot next to Torian York. I do think this makes things a little bit interesting moving forward. But
what do you think that's like as a player?
It's the nature of the beast. It's
I mean,
part of the business
I
now.
guess you wanted to be a professional athlete, and this is what you get, right?
Yeah.
There's like, you want to get paid, and I think you deserve to get paid. I'm not talking about Scooby Williams personally, like
Yeah.
just as a football player. But when you want it to look a little bit more professional, it's gonna look a little bit more professional, and like it's no longer just your job now. Like they're always gonna be bringing in, and it's not just a new freshman coming in, because that used to be the thing, right? Like we're recruiting the guy to replace you, but they get there and they're 18 years old. You feel pretty like they're recruiting a guy who was like second on Pitt's team in tackles for loss. Like you got real competition coming in come June. That's got to be tough when you go through spring and you feel like you did enough to beat out everybody there. You probably feel pretty good on April 21. Like, hey, I think I'm the guy. Like, I think it's going to be me and Torian. I think that's my spot. I think I did well. And then like on April 22nd, you're like, oh man, like I got a new guy to beat out. That's got to be tough.
Yeah, it does have to be tough. But again, like I don't think you can make it through the season, much like quarterback with one quarterback.
Yeah.
You're not going to make it through a season with just two linebackers.
Yeah, totally get why the staff wants to do it. Just I do think it's a new world, and this, we talk about the upsides of it, all the money, but there is a downside to it as well.
Yeah, the pressure to perform, I think, is higher than ever on these guys.
Yeah.
But again, great ad for A&M. I'm still going to stick with Scooby Williams as the guy next to Torian York, and I think it's a no-brainer that Torian York is only going to go up from here. I mean, from everything we've heard behind the scenes as far as work ethic, and obviously very heads-up player. I mean, I'm excited. Like this is another unit that I'm very excited about. And then we get into the back end, right? Which I think was the biggest question mark coming into spring.
Real quick before we move on, I got a one-on-one with Torian York for the magazine. Kind of a leading expert on Torian York's life at this point, just from covering him for so long back in his Temple days, and him kind of being a favorite of mine on the recruiting scene. He used to show up at Temple for practice 4:30 in the morning every single day, even when it wasn't practice, even weight room stuff, to the point where if you were working out with Torian, if he was in your like weight group, they started bringing paper towels with them to put down on the bench press. So like they wouldn't have to lay in his sweat when they would get on to their turn, because he was already like lathered up by the time like 7 a.m. workouts got there, because he had been there since 4:30 in the morning. Coach Stewart there at Temple just had to give him keys. Like, I'm not going to get up here with you. Like, so apparently Torian would just be at the Temple, just like running laps outside on the field, in the middle of pitch dark. He's just one of those guys that I think at a UTSA camp, he like you wear the you got your number 348 or whatever, right? He was whatever number he was. I think it was like 243 or something like that. One of the coaches told him he was like too chubby to get an offer or something like that. And he did that many sit-ups a day for the rest of his high school career. Like whatever that number was on it, it was like, yeah. So from then on, I did 238 sit-ups. Like he's just one of those dudes that's just like intrinsically motivated. I am not surprised that he is a captain of A&M. I'm just surprised that he's not even 19 years old yet. Like that is the shocking part of it. On to the defensive backfield. I'm going to say my opinion first, and then you tell me if I'm right or wrong. I think A&M has plenty of guys to start in the defensive backfield. I have no idea who they are still. Like I think Bryce Anderson has a job. If you put a gun to my head and we're like, name the 5 guys, if everybody's healthy, name the 5 guys who are going to play snap 1 against Notre Dame, I would not like my chances of even getting 3 of the 5 right. Like I just think it's still so up in the air.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. But what I do feel is that the secondary is going to be a lot better.
Yes.
It just feels like that unit is so much more cohesive. And again, we don't know who the starters are going to be. This will be another rotational deal. But from what I saw on Saturday, and again, reading too much into a spring game, and I'm trying to like keep that out of my head. I just feel like the secondary is going to be so much better. And I'm excited. I'm genuinely excited about the corner position, which I didn't think was going to happen. But like you said, I still don't know who the starters are going to be.
I went and walked around the field kind of as they were warming up, just to get a feel for the bodies, right? Because like a lot of like when they get recruited to A&M, I've been around them at some point in high school. I've went to one of their games. I've gone to a camp. Like I've seen like with the transfer, I've never stood next to BJ Mays. Like I don't know what that looks like. They are so much bigger
Yeah.
And the previous cornerbacks, like they look like linebackers. Like like they are long. Like they're not maybe as like thick like them, and they're athletes, right? But they're just like long athletes that
Yeah.
you get it's like types in dating. You get Mike Elko's type when you
Yeah.
walk around the field. Like you get an idea of like what Mike Elko's looking for when he's recruiting.
Yeah, and I think we did talk a little bit about, Mike Elko having that type, but talking about it and seeing 6'3" on the roster
Right.
is different than being up next to it and seeing it in
Well,
person.
and then seeing it because like you don't have the numbers memorized yet, or at least
Yeah.
at least I don't. Maybe some hardcores do. Maybe some of the maybe Carter's got that memorized, right? Like I don't have that memorized.
And they'll probably change before we get to fall.
Right, exactly, right. So like what you do is you see a body, right? You see a guy, and then you look down at the roster you got in your hand. Like that's how you do it as a media guy. So right, so I'm walking around and it's like, who's number 20? And you look down and you're like, dude, that's a cornerback. And you're like, you keep walking, you're like, who's number 18? It's Marcus Ratcliffe. And you're like, who? Oh my God. Like who's like they don't look like corners. And so that was the biggest, like in terms of just body, just like dummy looking at roster. That was the thing I noticed the most was just how much taller and longer the cornerbacks are. And safeties, really.
Yeah, but both positions. And then like you said, I mean, like you still have some of the smaller guys like a Bryce Anderson or a Dalton Brooks out there. And we say smaller, but that's relative, right? Just because of how big some of the guys that Elko has brought in are.
I liked Bryce Anderson in the deep safety, by the way. I thought he looked pretty comfortable back there opposed to nickel.
Yeah, I think it works. I think he makes a good center fielder back there. Especially when you have like a big guy like Marcus Ratcliffe at safety, opposite of him, that can like come up and play too. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how this kind of all shakes out. But like you, no clue what that starting, like gun to my head, I'm dying because I have no idea who the starters are going to be in the secondary against Notre Dame come August 31st.
Do you want to guess just for fun? Like I'm going to run down mine. Here's my guess. I got Tyreek Chappelle and Will Lee as the starting corners. I'll take Jaden Hill as the nickel. Bryce Anderson at free safety. Give me Trey Jones at strong safety. That'll be my 5. I wanted to pick Marcus Ratcliffe, but Jones is the senior. I'll go with those. So Tyreek Chappelle, Will Lee at corner, Trey Jones, Bryce Anderson at deep safety, Jaden Hill at nickel. That'll be my guess that is sure to be wrong.
This is going to be tough. So I'm going to go with deep safety, the same, and Bryce Anderson. I am going to go with Marcus Ratcliffe at strong safety. I don't know why I'm saying this, but I still think Dalton Brooks could end up at nickel. I think that could be a spot where he kind of slots in. I'm going to go with BJ Mays at one corner and Will Lee at the other corner.
Okay. Yeah, I think it could be. I think it'll be that. This is going to be fascinating. Like that's the most fascinating position because I see Mike Elko as like a safety whisperer. Like that's his thing, right? Like defensive back's kind of his bag. And so like that does feel like you'd imagine because a lot of these coaches tell you they don't watch a ton of tape before spring because they want to have fresh eyes and like see everybody for what they are and not what they were on tape because you don't know exactly the responsibilities and all that kind of stuff. I don't think that's really true. I think these guys are junkies and they watch like every single snap of every single player like 30 times because that's what else are they going to do, right? Talk to their wives? Like, no, they're going to do this, right? I just think that he looked at the defensive back play last year and just like couldn't get through it all. Like it may be the one thing that he just turned off and was like, no, I'm just not, I can't even watch this anymore because it was that bad last year. But when he was there, it was the opposite. Like they were so good in the secondary. I think that's going to be, you can't fix offensive line in one offseason. I don't think the offensive line is going to take this like giant leap forward. I think they may be better, but I think if you're a fan expecting the Aggie offensive line to be like top, notch, you're going to be disappointed. I think the secondary can make that kind of light year jump, and I expect them to make a very, very big one.
Yeah, I'm like you. It just feels like it felt different watching those guys out there. And it's also like it didn't feel like there was really blown coverages either, which is another huge thing. And I could be just, drinking the maroon Kool-Aid at this point and forgetting about some blown coverages. But it just felt like as a symptom of the team as a whole with discipline, we really saw a discipline back end too. So it's not just having the guys back there. It was also knowing their assignment and performing it. And theoretically, that should only get better as they have more time in the system come fall.
A&M 11-1. Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm still going 8-4.
Yeah, I'm still going 8-4 too. That home schedule though has me excited. I'm gonna be spending a lot of time in Kyle Field, and I'm not mad about that. I think I'm gonna see 4 tremendous atmospheres this year at Kyle Field. I cannot wait for that. Anything else from the spring game before we move into some portal additions that have happened so far already, or are we good there on the spring?
I think we're good. Definitely gonna have some interest in the special teams at some point. Gonna have to dig more into that, but
Yeah, kicker
I didn't feel
transfer.
like yeah, exactly. And I feel like we didn't learn too much. I mean, we had Randy Bond, so you kind of know what you're getting there at the kicker position, but uh, definitely something that I'm going to be interested in going forward.
Let's get into some portal additions. A&M hasn't lost anybody of note, so nothing really to worry about there. They are over the 85-man scholarship limit at this moment and still trying to add 2 or 3, 4 more pieces. So expect some attrition, or quietly behind the scenes, some guys are going to get to become walk-ons. Jay, I haven't thought out this conversation. I don't. Maybe this isn't the best way to do it, but you know me, I just start talking about what I'm thinking out loud. I wonder if you know how when we were or before we were live and you learned about college football and you're like, Texas won all those national championships because Daryl K. Royal could recruit the 100 best players in the state and he didn't have any scholarship limits. I think NIL is going to move towards that. I think NIL is going to eliminate scholarship limits because it's 85 scholarships. But if somebody can sign with the Dixie Chicken for $100,000 or whatever, and that just happens to be how much the education costs, like I don't think this is an A&M thing. I think this is going to happen at all the schools with excess budgets where like they are no longer really worried about the 85 scholarship, because if they're 3 over, they can have 3 of their seniors that are grads just like be, walk-ons and pay for a small amount of education. That's my conspiracy theory of the day.
I don't think that will be too far from the truth.
Yeah, I think it's already happening personally.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. We don't get maybe we need to FOIA. I guess you can't really NIL because it's not governed by the schools.
Yep.
Man,
I can't wait until it is, though. I can't wait until it is, because it's coming, and then people like me are going to be circling with those FOIAs, like just like loaded up, like because that a secret about media folk. Most of us, that's our favorite part of the job is sending out those FOIAs. Not even sending them, but getting them back. Right. Getting all the information back. Like you feel like you're getting stuff from NASA because they'll like black out some stuff, because it's like black ops, college athletics. Yeah. It's so ridiculous. Even if you can't use any of it, it's fun to FOIA stuff. Like it is. I remember so when I was on the UTSA beat, like it was just so small and like there wasn't as many people like on the beat. I was submitting so many FOIAs that eventually they like pulled me into a meeting and they were like, Craven, how about you just ask us first? And, then if we're like, no, then you can FOIA us, but like, we'll just give you some of this stuff. Like, you don't have to like go down this like deep, dark hole for like all this kind of stuff. But really, I just didn't want to pay the money.
It feels like espionage.
Yeah. But it cost them some money. It's like $30, $40 every single time one comes through or whatever. And then, it's UTSA at that. And this was like 2013, 14, 15. So before Jeff Traylor helped them earn a little bit of money by winning. But
Larry Coker years.
Yeah. And I was just trying to get behind how that stuff worked, right? Like, where was this money coming from? Like, I went to UTSA, like, we don't have any. Like, so how is this happening? What are y'all doing? What's going on with the Alamo Dome? Are y'all doing, on facility? Like, is there on campus stadium stuff happening? Like, you can go get some of those notes from like meetings behind closed doors and stuff because it's a public university. And yeah, and eventually they had to be like, you just want our notes? Like, you just want the minutes? Like, what are you doing? I was just young and didn't really, like I was overzealous or whatever. But it was a lot of fun. Every now and then the UTSA SID gives me some shit for some of the stuff I pulled in my mid-20s.
Going into intelligence.
Yeah. Right. They're like, what are you doing? It's UTSA football. Like, nobody cares about this stuff. Like, what are you? And then they check the website and half of it wouldn't even be on it. I wasn't even reporting on all of it. I'm just like bored and like interested in things. Yeah, that was a lot of good. Those were good times. Those were simpler times. Speaking of non-simpler times, the transfer portal is open until May 1st, I believe, or June 30th, or no, April 30th. I always forget how many months. I got to do the knuckle. Do you do the knuckle thing on how many months are or how many days are in a month, or do you just have that memorized?
I think I just have it memorized at this
I
point.
still do the knuckle thing. I don't know if you've ever done that. April 30th is when the portal closes. A&M has added 3 players to my knowledge over the last few days. Solomon DeShields, we talked about, linebacker from Pitt. Shane Calhoun, tight end from East Carolina. And then I'm going to let Jay pronounce the next person's name.
Yeah, we had a discussion before the podcast went on,
Yeah.
and Mike didn't feel comfortable saying
Yeah.
for it. So I'm willing to fall on the sword for this. Utah offensive lineman Koli Fa'aiu.
That's
Uh,
impressive.
yeah, and I don't know if that's right or not. We're gonna have to check it. We couldn't find the
Yeah, Utah didn't have a pronunciation guy. I
yeah, we
like went
can't,
to their website.
but I'm rocking with Koli Fa'aiu as my
Yeah.
pronunciation there.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, please correct us if we're wrong. I am a country bumpkin, a redneck, if you will, from Bertram, Texas. That's where Pinky Wilson's from, by the way, the author of the Aggie War Hymn. He has a statue in Bertram by our by the train depot. It's about the only thing we got in Bertram. We don't even have a high school, and so like I have a very hard time pronouncing some of these names. I do think it's going to be a name I have to learn because I think it's one of the more impactful incoming transfer additions that they maybe signed going back to January. Bryce Foster and his injury history and his track and being a dual sport guy and not always being there. I think they needed to shore up that center spot, and I believe now they feel good about it, whether Bryce is there or not. Right? It gives you not only somebody to push Bryce Foster, but somebody to maybe start in his stead or take some snaps there. He can also play guard. I think that was a huge get for the Aggies offensive line.
Yeah, it felt like an area of need for A&M. And again, like we talked about, it feels like maybe A&M felt like they had some areas they needed to address after spring game, and it feels like they've addressed them.
Yep. Yeah, DeShield's another one at linebacker. We talked about that and what that's going to mean for that position. But now you have 3 guys that you feel really, really good about, and you're going to need multiple dudes. You got a couple centers. I would imagine Foster can also kick out to guard in a pinch as well. And so you've built the interior a little bit more there, depth. But Chase Bisontis moving inside to guard as well. So it feels like the interior is pretty good. Left tackle is pretty good. Really, it's right tackle. That really is going to dictate if A&M's offensive line is average or if A&M's offensive line it can be pretty good. Again, the only Ask Jay question I had here was the better spring game format question. Did I miss any? I've been pretty busy today. Did I miss any?
I think we may have got one about my experience as NASCAR media.
Yes, I want to know about that as well.
Because I saw your boy.
What was the that's right. What was the media experience for Jay Arnold there at Texas Motor Speedway with Sonny Dykes leading the way?
Yeah, it was great.
That
I
is
had
my
a great time. I didn't make it for the truck race on Friday night, but Texas Motor Speedway did credential us for Saturday and Sunday. Saturday watched the Xfinity race, and so when I go to Texas A&M games, and I've only gotten to do bowl games as media, I know everybody in the press box still from my playing days and getting recruited and whatnot.
Yeah, that Aggie media turnover doesn't really happen too much.
No, it doesn't. When I walked into the NASCAR Media Center, I felt like such a fish out of water, just with, not really knowing too much about how the NASCAR world works. The Media Center is actually, it's pretty wild. So I got in there on Saturday before the Xfinity race, and the NASCAR Cup Series had just finished qualifying. So they're having the Cup drivers come in, and they just kind of spread out around the media center, and guys just walk up to them and ask questions. And so you have like a team PR rep from every team with their driver kind of escorting them in, just to kind of stay on top of things. But it's not like football where you have one guy up at the podium talking to the media. And then the next guy comes in. It's the drivers are all kind of like sporadically come in and you just kind of listen to it. And me, I didn't want to ask any questions because I didn't know, I know enough about NASCAR to ask questions, but I did not feel comfortable in that room.
Yeah.
So I listened to some of the established guys like Jeff Gluck from The Athletic and those folks, Bob Pockris, that know this sport and have been covering this sport, kind of similar to A&M where there's not a lot of turnover there. I don't know them personally, but I've been around the sport long enough to know that they do a great job covering it. And then Sunday was great. Just kind of more of the same, where I feel like next year I'll be comfortable to actually ask questions about the track and the drivers and things of that nature. But the best part was walking into the media center on Sunday after grabbing lunch, which was Babe's Chicken, by the way.
Hey,
Incredible.
that's good. That's a
Great
good point.
catering. Yeah. And then all of a sudden I look up and is that Sonny Dykes at the podium? And sure enough, it was Sonny
Just
Dykes.
talking about
Yeah.
Fort Worth.
But it was cool to hear him kind of talk about it because I think he had some former players on some of the pit crews
Oh,
because NASCAR pit crews have started to recruit former college athletes as the pit stops have gotten quicker and a more crucial part of uh, the NASCAR Sunday race. You don't have the guys that are just kind of like, buddies from beer
smoking some
drinking buddies.
heaters.
Yeah. They're real athletes. And I mean,
Yeah.
like Joe Gibbs Racing has like a full nutritionist and everything for the pit crew guys now. So it's kind of cool to see how that has evolved.
Why is not Jay Arnold going through some of these pit crew stuff? Like, I feel like we just stumbled upon something here.
Well, because Jay Arnold is not in shape to be a
You playing
NASCAR.
rugby?
Yeah, it's beer league rugby. There's no beer league NASCAR pit crews for good reason, to be
Yeah.
fair.
Yeah. We're going to get into what beer league rugby is at some point because I mean, I feel like all rugby is still pretty hardcore. Like, it's
Yeah,
not like
I mean it
softball. It's
is.
not like league softball where there's like no contact. So you're
That's
still
fair.
still getting hit there. Do you side question here? Do you have much experience asking questions at press conferences and things like that? And if so, do you get nervous? Are you somebody who gets nervous about that?
I don't have experience, I should say. I feel like I haven't asked questions for A&M either. And I feel like part of that is because I do get nervous.
Yeah.
Uh, I have not done a lot of interviews. At some point, I'm going to have to like rip that Band-Aid off, and I feel like I'd rather do it at A&M than do it with NASCAR in a sport where I'm not following it quite as closely week to week and with the inside knowledge. But yeah, at some point, I need to rip that question asked Band-Aid off and just kind of put myself out there.
The reason I asked is because I struggled with that really bad early in my career. I have some anxiety. I'm an introvert. All those things working against me. And so when I was at the Taylor Daily Press, I would leave the game and call the coach from my phone to interview him, so I didn't have to go down to the field and do it in person and find some players and all that kind of stuff. I was just 23 years old and
Yeah.
just gave me extreme anxiety. I didn't intern. I was a psychology major at UTSA. I didn't plan to kind of go into this. I kind of gotten some things and I didn't, anyway, I just ended up in this industry and all of a sudden I was, I had to go talk to these strangers, people, and I really, really struggled with it. And I also am a golfer. I don't play as much anymore, but at that time in my life, I played a lot of golf. And I always remembered, Ben Crenshaw talked about how all golfers get nervous on the first and the ninth tee. And that's because they think everybody at the clubhouse is watching them, right? That you're in front of people and it's not just your foursome. There's people waiting to go. And he said the best advice he ever heard is nobody gives a shit about you, Ben. Right? Like they're worried about their shot. They're drinking their beer. They're on their phone. They're worried about the next thing. They are not watching you hit from T1. So don't get nervous about it. And I just started trying to apply that to the question thing, right? It's like nobody cares about your question. They're listening to the answer. Like nobody's even going to hear this most of the time. Like it is completely fine. And that helped me get over it. But I am still one of those people who gets pretty nervous, especially because I jump to different rooms. I'm not always in the A&M room. I'm not always in the Texas room. I'm not always in the TC room. So I do kind of get nervous in those buildings because I'm not one of the regulars, and so I think that's an underrated part about the media is getting that gumption up too. And I respect young guys and gals who don't seemingly have that nervousness that just like jump in there and just like ask questions. I think it's an incredible skill because I just don't have it. I'm too introverted. That's just not something I can do.
Yeah. So I will make a promise to you that over the next year that I will rip that Band-Aid off and ask a question at some point.
Yeah. All right. We'll do it. We'll do it. I'll be there to hold your hand. We'll do it.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
No problem. No problem. All right, Jay. That will do it for us. Our show this week. I talked about A&M Spring Game. And that's about it, really, because that's the big thing going on at A&M right now. We will get together and discuss our off-season plans and what we're going to do with the pod moving forward. Jay started his new job. I'm going away in June, not in a bad way. but on vacation. I know the way I said that. I was like, oh man, my mom's listening. She's gonna think something's up.
Oh man.
And so so we'll figure out what we're gonna do going forward, but we'll definitely be back by July with media days and stuff. Probably do one every other week, something like that, in the off season. So for Jay Arnold, for Mike Craven, and for Dave Campbell's Texas Football and the Republic Football Network, we will talk to you next time.